Hi, in the first video we covered how to address the COVID-19 transactions by entering the data into your time and income screen each pay period. In this one we're going to address how to preload your COVID-19 records so that each time you open your pay period it will auto-populate the time and income screen. So to do that we first need to set up a couple of alternative transactions. Now the reason we're doing this is because in the time and income screen to enter the other income, you can only do that through the time and income screen. But what we want to do is preload it so that it automatically applies each week. So the first thing that we would do is we would go into the employee screen, go to employee details, and I'll deal with Pat Jones. Now, in this case, we're going to, because we can't use the other income option here, we're going to set up two regular allowances, one for the subsidy and one for the top up if it's applicable. So we go to regular allowances and we go to set up allowance items first. Now you'll notice there is already a COVID-19 option here for the wage subsidy. So we click on that. We use the arrow to move it across. So now I've got that available. If I went into my add option, I've got the ability to choose the COVID-19 wage subsidy and enter that. And I'll come back to that in a second. Next, we want to enter an allowance or create an allowance for the top up. So we go to set up allowance items. We go to more. And then we add. So you can ignore all these ones I've got here because those are ones I've been using for other tests. So if I put in COVID-19, you can call it, I've called it COVID-19 80% top up. So that the employee, when they see it on their payslip, will know that they are getting their wages topped up to 80% in addition to the base payment. It's important, in fact, it's critical that you make this taxable and you leave it as ordinary. So that way this amount will be taxed when it gets paid to the employee and it'll also factor into their leave calculation. So I save that. And I close that window, close this window. Now if I go in here to add, I've got the ability to also choose my top up. So I would add this one and I would put it in as 585.80, save it. And then I would add again and I would choose the second option, which is my top up. And I would put in the amount that I'm going to top them up every week. In my case, it was 214.20. Now this is based on each specific employee's pay because you've got to be basing it on 80% of their normal pay. Now, if you're topping up 100%, then the amount here and the description can be whatever you want it to be. So I save that. So I've now preloaded this so that every time I open a pay period, my employee will receive these two amounts. Now, again, it's important that the dates are correct. So as I've just done there, I actually want to apply this from the 16th. So I'll just go and change that to the 16th. So these are as at date. So if you've got the wrong date in there, and you won't find it appearing in your time and income screen when you need it. So it's important that the applicable date is used. I made that mistake on purpose, of course. So now I've got that in there. So my employee is preloaded with two allowances. Now, the important thing to remember is these allowances will apply every week from that date forward. So if at some point you get to the point where you're not paying the subsidy or the top-up amount changes for whatever reason, you need to edit these before you actually process the pay. So I've got those there now ready to go. If I now go into my employees time and income screen and I go into the current pay period, so I've now got this situation here where the employee doesn't have any default hours. I think on this one here I do have default hours, so I've got two, and I'll show you both scenarios. So now what I would do is I would come in here. Now, if you want to preload the COVID-19, again, I've shown you how to add it manually, but what you can do with Crystal is you can put in what they call leave periods. So this is where you're going to enter a transaction that's going to apply for a future period. So I click on leave transactions, I click on add, I come in here and I choose the COVID-19 leave, which is down the bottom, and I say from when is this going to apply and when is it going to stop applying. Now, I would suggest at this stage that you put it in just for the 4 weeks. You can put it in for longer, it doesn't really matter, and then you save that. Now, what that will do is by doing that, it will automatically populate the current week in a second when I close that. So now I've got my COVID-19 transaction sitting here. So that's all good to go, and I don't need to enter those individually. Next week it will populate again, so this will get self-populated automatically. You won't need to go and add it each time. Each time you open a pay period, these will be populated. If I approve my pay now, what it will do is it automatically brings through the subsidy and the top up. So now my pay is basically complete and I don't have to do anything else. So that's the simplest way to do it on an ongoing basis for the next 4 weeks. As I said earlier, it's important that you make sure that the dates you're entering are valid for the right periods and not longer than they need to be. You can always go and edit those dates in the future. If you want to push that leave period out longer, you can simply come in here, go into leave periods, and edit your dates if you need to. So just make sure you put that into an appropriate date range and make sure that these dates at least include the current period if you're doing it for the current week. If it's doing it for next week, you can put it in advance and it will apply to next week. I did have an example here where the employee their default hours have come through. So again, I can do the same thing here. I can go into the leave periods, and what it will do is it will override what I've got in here now. So if I come in and I add this for Raymond Jones, now I go and choose COVID-19 again, and I put this in and say, right, this is going to apply from the 16th again to the 19th of April, which is my 4-week period, and I save this. Now this could obviously be for 12 weeks or whatever date range is appropriate depending on what the government decides to do about things with the subsidy. I know we're in close down for 4 weeks, so you could make that 12 weeks if you're going to be closed for the 12 weeks or receiving the subsidy for 12 weeks. By doing that, it will then override what was in there previously with the default hours, and that will then be good to go. Now, in this case, I'm pretty sure I haven't preloaded the allowance. No, I haven't. So if you haven't preloaded the allowance, it needs to be in the employee's master file to apply every week, but you can still come in here if you need to and add it by choosing the options in here and do the same thing. Bear in mind that if you're using the allowance option, as I've just done, because that's going to preload it, you wouldn't use the other income. You're only going to use either the allowance or the other income. But once you've done that, then every time you, as I said, every time you open a pay period, the employee's pay will be preloaded with the appropriate amounts. And what you'll see sometimes is that the allowances don't appear. Don't worry. When you approve it, the allowance will appear down the bottom. So if you don't see it, just approve it. If it doesn't appear here after you've approved it, it means you haven't entered into the employee's master file, or you've got the date wrong, and that date's not going to apply until after this particular pay period. But generally, that's what you should see. So that's a pretty straightforward process for getting it preloaded, and that will save you a lot of time and a lot of calculations down the track. Now, again, this is based on the fact that these things aren't going to change in the coming weeks, that the subsidy and the top-up are going to be the same in the coming weeks. If they're not, you can still go in here and edit it on a pay period basis. If for some reason you wanted to change this, you can change it, but we do recommend that you actually preload this if you can, and it'll just save you a lot of time on a processing basis. Again, also if you've got employees who are having actual hours coming through, then you need to bear that in mind, because obviously what we don't want is the actual hours overriding or conflicting with these. So this is on the assumption that your employees aren't working, you're not bringing through actual hours into the pay period. This is just you're preloading something for the future while there is no work being done by anybody. If the employees are working, then don't preload the dates for them, and then don't preload the subsidies, because you'll need to use the other income option if that's the case. So hopefully that's clear. And if you've got any questions about this, again, get hold of the team. In the next video, I will show you how to go and work out what an employee's normal pay looks like if you don't have some other record to tell you what that is.